14 pallets. 3 hours left on my shift, and the street clock outside the warehouse window just froze on 11:47 for the second time in a minute. I don't notice the world dying right away. I notice the numbers first because numbers are my job. I'm Chen Mo, 26, inventory manager at Wolfeng Superstore, warehouse block 7. My whole life is expiration dates, pallet counts, truck schedules. Not exciting. Turns out it's about to be the only thing that matters. I clock out at midnight, walk the 4 blocks home like always. Then the streetlights start going out. Not flickering. Going out, one after another in a straight line, like something is walking toward me and switching them off on purpose. I stop counting streetlights around number 6. That's when the air goes solid. Not cold, solid. Like the whole street got sealed in glass. A parked car 3 meters away has a moth frozen mid-flight against its headlight, wings spread, not moving, not falling. Don't bother running, a voice says behind me. The street's not going anywhere. Neither are you for the next few minutes. I turn around. A man in a harlequin suit, half black, half gold, is spinning a roulette wheel that's somehow strapped to his back like a backpack. He looks bored. Genuinely bored, the way I look at a spreadsheet I've seen 100 times. I'm Luo, he says, one of the architects of cycles. You can think of me as management, not yours, the planet's. I say nothing because there is nothing to say to a floating wheelman in a frozen street. Here's the short version, he continues, checking his nails. Every few thousand years, we run a reset. Some of you get power. We call it the awakening. Then the apocalypse of God starts. 4 waves. Fire rain first, then the beast uprising, then the judgment of elements, then the avatars come to check the homework. 90% of you don't make it. It's not personal, it's maintenance. Maintenance, I repeat. Don't take it hard. You're one of the lucky ones. A seed. Got picked out of 8 billion for a free spin. 1 spin, no charge, professional courtesy, before the slaughter. He gestures at the wheel. Go on. Spin it. You don't have a choice, technically, but I like to pretend you do. I look at the frozen moth. I look at my own hand, which is shaking. Then I spin the wheel, because arguing with a bored god in the middle of a street that stopped existing seems like the wrong use of my remaining 3 hours before shift math stops mattering. The wheel screams light and color and stops on 3 letters in gold SSS. Luo's eyebrows actually go up. First real reaction I've gotten from him. Huh, he says. Didn't expect that. Congratulations, warehouse boy. You rolled the rarest tier on the board. He snaps his fingers and a shape burns itself into the air in front of my chest. A small black door, no bigger than a cabinet, floating there like it's always been part of me. Eternal Hall, Luo announces, like a game show host who's already bored of the prize. Pocket dimension. Time doesn't move inside it. Nothing spoils, nothing rots, nothing dies of age. That's it? A storage closet? That's it. And before you complain, yes, some seeds got fists that punch through mountains. Some got poison that melts steel. Somebody in Seoul apparently got the ability to make people love him. And you got a warehouse. He shrugs. Funny thing is, this might end up being the one that matters most, but that's tomorrow's problem, not mine. I reach toward the black door out of pure instinct. My hand goes through the surface like it isn't there, and inside, nothing. Empty space, faintly lit, no walls I can find. Rules, since you'll waste less time if I just tell you, Luo says. 1, capacity isn't measured in weight, it's measured in core cells. They only grow if you actually use the thing. Survive with it. Don't just hoard for fun. 2, you can put objects in all you like. Living things, no. Not without what we call a crystallization contract, which is a polite way of saying you freeze a person in time indefinitely. Think hard before you try that on anyone. 3, he taps the black door. You can only pull things out within arm's reach. This isn't a weapon, it's logistics. Don't get creative and expect it to punch anyone for you. How long until the first wave? Luo smiles, and for the first time it isn't bored. It's something closer to curious. 28 days. Fire rain. Try not to die before then. It would ruin the punchline. The street unfreezes all at once. Sound crashes back in. A car horn 2 blocks over, a dog barking. The ordinary hum of a city that has no idea what's coming. Luo is gone. The moth finishes its flight and lands on the headlight. I stand there for 11 seconds, according to my phone, before I do the only sane thing available to a warehouse manager who just got handed a magic storage closet. I test it. I pick up a rock from the gutter, push it against the black door. It sinks in and disappears. No sound, no resistance. I reach in, grab it back. Same rock, not even dusty. 28 days. 1 number. My brain, trained on inventory sheets, does what it always does with a number. It starts building a plan around it. 3 blocks from my apartment, reality gives me a preview of what 28 days actually means for people who don't get a warning. A currency exchange kiosk on the corner has its metal shutter half torn off. Two men are dragging a third out by his collar while a woman screams into a phone that nobody's answering. Nobody stops. Nobody calls the police because apparently 3 people already tried and nothing came. This isn't the apocalypse yet. This is just Tuesday getting worse an hour early, rumors already spreading online about strange lights over 3 continents, about governments going quiet. I don't help. I'm ashamed of that later, but right now I keep walking because I already know something none of them do, and the knowing changes the math completely. Whatever's coming isn't going to ask permission from currency kiosks or riot police. It's going to erase the difference between rich and poor, armed and unarmed, prepared and not, inside 28 days. I get home and don't sleep. I sit at my kitchen table with a notebook, actual paper because my hands need something to do, and I write down every number I know. My studio apartment worth roughly 380,000 yuan on the open market. 6 to 8 weeks to sell normally. My savings 62,000 yuan. My credit limit across 2 cards 45,000 yuan, untouched. Wofeng Superstore's clearance and expiring stock policy, anything past 70% of shelf life gets marked down 60%. And anything within 5 days of the actual expiration date gets pulled and usually landfilled because nobody wants the liability of selling it. 28 days. I do the math out loud because saying it makes it feel like a decision instead of a fear. 62,000 in savings. If the world doesn't end, I lose maybe half of it reselling an apartment fast and eating early withdrawal penalties. If the world does end, none of that matters, because nobody's going to be collecting on a mortgage from a corpse. I write the sentence down. I underline it. It's the ugliest, most useful piece of logic I've ever produced, and it's going to become the whole foundation of the next 4 weeks if I'm wrong. I spend the rest of my life paying off debt as a very stupid, very alive man. If I'm right, debt won't exist long enough to matter. I decide, sitting there at 2 a.m. with a rock I can make disappear on command, that I am not going to spend 28 days being scared. I'm going to spend them being a warehouse manager, because that is the only skill I have, and for once in my life it might be the one that keeps people breathing. Meanwhile, 4 kilometers east, in an unlit office above a shuttered pharmacy, a woman with a military buzz cut and 3 days of stubble on her jaw is doing math of her own. Suli doesn't have a black door floating in front of her chest. She doesn't have a wheel-spinning God's phone number. What she has is 14 years of field medicine, 2 tours nobody talks about, and a gut feeling that's kept her alive since long before the streetlights started going out on their own. She's already been stockpiling water purification tablets for 8 months, ever since the first meteor videos started circulating with details that didn't match any known meteor. She doesn't know a man named Chen Mo exists yet. In 5 days, that's going to change, and neither of them is going to be ready for how much the other one has already prepared. By sunrise, I've made my first real decision, and it costs something, which is the only kind of decision worth writing down. I call my bank's 24-hour line and start the paperwork to close my deposit account early, eating the penalty. Then I open a real estate app and list my studio at 12% under market, tagged urgent sale, cash only, fast close, 28 days. Somewhere out there, a bored god is probably watching to see if the warehouse manager wastes his free spin sitting still. I'm not going to waste it. Day 2. 60,000 yuan in liquid cash, a studio apartment listed under market, and 26 days left before the sky supposedly opens up. I spend the morning learning that turning a life into cash fast is its own kind of combat. The real estate agent calls at 9, sounding personally offended. 12% under? Mr. Chen, you're leaving money on the table? I need it closed in a week, not 2 months. Nobody closes in a week. Somebody will, at this price. I hang up before she can argue. She calls back 40 minutes later with a cash buyer, no financing contingency, ready to sign by Friday. Money moves fast when you stop caring about winning. The bank is worse. The early withdrawal penalty on my deposit eats almost 9%, and the woman behind the counter looks at me like I've lost my mind, pulling out savings I was supposed to leave alone for another 11 months. You could wait, she offers. You'd keep the interest. I could, I agree, and don't explain the part where the interest doesn't matter if the bank itself might not exist to pay it out in a month. I take the loss, 56,400 yuan in my account by noon. Then I do the part that actually scares me. I open applications for every credit line I qualify for. 2 new cards, a personal loan against my soon-to-be former apartment equity, a cash advance limit raised twice in one morning through a service that flags unusual activity and calls to verify I'm not being scammed. Sir, are you experiencing financial distress? We can connect you with a counselor. I'm fine, I tell the voice on the phone. I'm making an investment. It isn't exactly a lie. Here's the ugly logic, the same one I wrote down at 2 a.m. If I'm wrong about all of this, if Luo was a hallucination, if the wheel was a stress dream, if nothing happens in 26 days, I will owe roughly 140,000 yuan I don't have, and I will spend a decade working it off as the stupidest man in the city. If I'm right, none of these creditors are going to be in a position to collect anything from anyone. A bank that doesn't survive the fire rain isn't going to send a debt collector. I max out every line I'm approved for. By 3 p.m., I'm sitting on 187,000 yuan in cash and credit, more money than I've ever touched in my life, and every yuan of it is a bet that the world is about to end. The buying starts that afternoon, and this is where my actual job stops being useless. Wofeng Superstore has a warehouse policy I've enforced for 4 years, without ever loving it. Anything past 70% of shelf life gets a 60% markdown, and anything within 5 days of hard expiration gets pulled entirely and usually landfilled, because selling it creates liability nobody wants. I know the exact shelf number for every category. I know which supplier reps are desperate to move dead stock before a quarterly audit exposes their over-ordering. I know which of them will sell me a truck's worth of expired canned goods for scrap price and never ask why a mid-level manager suddenly wants 6 pallets of rice on a personal account. None of it matters to me the way it matters to them. Expiration is a countdown that stops the second something crosses into the black door. I called Dung, a supplier rep I've bought lunch for exactly twice in 4 years. You still sitting on that canned protein shipment that failed the freshness audit? Chen, that stuff's 2 weeks from pull date. I can't move it through normal channels. Insurance won't. I'm not asking for insurance. I'm asking for a price. Long pause. Then, carefully cash. 11,000 won buys me 400 cases of canned protein that a spreadsheet says is nearly worthless, and that, once it crosses into my haul, will never expire at all. I meet him behind the loading dock at 6, hand over a bag of bills that feels like something out of a bad crime movie, and walk 2 truckloads of cans, one at a time, into a black door only I can see. It takes 40 minutes and nobody on the street notices a thing because from the outside, a man is just standing very still near a delivery truck, occasionally bending down to pick something up that immediately isn't there anymore. By the time I'm done, my core hasn't grown at all. Luo said it grows from survival, not shopping, but my stomach has stopped being tight for the first time since the wheel stopped spinning. 400 cases, first real number on the board, was 62,000 yuan in a savings account, is now 11,000 yuan and 400 cases of protein that will still be edible in 100 years. I don't get a clean night to enjoy it. 5 days into this, walking back from a second supplier meeting near the old pharmaceutical district, I hear a woman's voice doing something most voices don't do under a beating, staying level. Wallets in the bag, take it and go. You don't need to do the other thing. 3 men, 1 woman backed against a shuttered storefront, and a 4th already going through a duffel bag on the ground that clearly isn't hers. She's maybe 30, buzzed hair, a stance that doesn't look like fear so much as calculation. She's watching their feet, not their faces, the way someone trained watches an opponent. I have 11,000 yuan left, 400 cases of canned protein, and exactly 0 combat training. What I have instead is a supply closet and 4 years of knowing exactly what's heavy, what's slippery, and what breaks glass. I don't think about it as bravery. I think about it as inventory. I reach into the hall and my hand closes around a case of glass-bottled water. Heavy, awkward. Exactly the kind of thing that's useless in a fight and perfect for throwing badly from an unexpected angle. I hurl it at the nearest man's shoulder. It connects, he staggers, and in that half second the woman moves. She doesn't run. She steps into the gap, drives her palm into the staggering man's throat, and turns his own momentum into the second attacker's face. It's fast, ugly, efficient. Nothing like the movies. The third man decides 2 surprises in 10 seconds is enough math for him and takes off down the alley with the duffel bag still in his hand, which is, I'll learn later, exactly the trade she'd have made anyway, her money for her freedom to fight, not the other way around. She looks at me, chest heaving, and doesn't say thank you. She says, "Where did that bottle come from? I had it on me." "You didn't. I watched your hands the whole time you were reaching for it." There was nothing there, and then there was. I could lie. 4 years of managing inventory has taught me that a bad lie costs more than an inconvenient truth. So instead, I reach into the same spot in the air and pull out a second case of water and hold it out to her like evidence at a trial. She doesn't scream. She doesn't run either. She sets the case down very carefully on the ground like it might detonate, and studies my face for a long 5 seconds. "I'm Su Li," she says finally. "And you're about to tell me exactly what that is, because either you're about to make my life a lot easier, or you're the strangest thing I've seen since the news started lying about meteors." I tell her. All of it. The frozen street, the Harlequin god, the wheel, the 26 days now counting down. She listens without interrupting, which I'll later learn is rare for her, and when I finish, she doesn't ask if I'm crazy. She asks, how much can that thing actually hold? I don't know yet. It grows. Then we're going to need a lot more than 400 cases of protein. She picks her duffel bag up off the ground, the one the third man dropped mid-run, and slings it over her shoulder like she's already decided something. I've been prepping for something like this for 8 months on a medic's salary and a bad feeling. You've got money and a warehouse the size of nothing. Congratulations, warehouse boy. You just got a partner. That night, we sit on the floor of my half-packed apartment, most of the furniture already sold, most of what's left already inside the hall, and build the first real plan. Suli knows things I don't: what medical supplies actually matter when hospitals stop functioning, how much clean water a person needs per day versus how much people think they need, which neighborhoods will turn violent first and why. I know things she doesn't: how much a warehouse can move in a day, which suppliers are sitting on stock nobody's watching, how to make 80,000 yuan disappear into 600 kilos of rice without anyone asking questions until it's too late for the question to matter. 23 days left. On the notepad between us, under my ugly 2 a.m. math from 6 days ago, Suli writes a second column of numbers: water in liters, calories per person per day, medical kits by injury type. And for the first time since the street froze, the fear in my chest turns into something closer to a plan with a shape. Outside, 3 blocks over, the currency exchange kiosk from 4 nights ago is still boarded shut. Nobody's fixed it, nobody's going to. Day 28, 0 left on the countdown. I'm standing on the roof of Wolfeng Superstore at 11:40 p.m. Because Suli said watch the sky, not the ground. And for once, I don't argue with her instincts. The stars go out first. Not clouds covering them. They go out section by section the way the streetlights did on night 1, except this time it's the entire sky doing it instead of one street. Then the color comes a deep red bleeding through where the black used to be, and something inside that color starts falling. Down, Suli says, and we're moving before the first impact even lands. It doesn't sound like a meteor. A real meteor is a streak and a boom. This is a hiss, wet and wrong, and where it lands 3 blocks away, the ground doesn't crater so much as it curdles, asphalt bubbling, folding in on itself, and out of that folding something climbs. Numbers, because numbers are the only thing keeping my hands steady. 211 people sheltering in the supermarket basement below us, 6 exits, 1 generator, 4 days of food already moved into the black door and ready to distribute, 0 combat training between me and Suli's 1 gun. The things climbing out of the craters are the size of large dogs. Ash gray, skin cracking like dried riverbed with red light leaking through the cracks. 6 of them from the nearest crater alone, and they're not moving randomly. They're moving towards sound, toward the crowd still filing into the basement entrance, some of them screaming, which is the worst thing they could be doing right now. Ash hounds, Suli says, like she's naming a species she already expected. They'll take the loud ones first. We need the entrance sealed before that pack reaches it. I don't have a gun. I have a door only I can see, and 4 years of knowing exactly how heavy things are. I reach in and my hand closes around a fuel canister, 20 liters, the kind we used for the backup generators at the warehouse. And I don't think, I just move, dragging a line of fuel across the alley mouth that funnels toward the basement stairs. Suli's already firing. Calm, 3-round bursts that drop the lead hound mid-stride, and the pack redirects toward us instead of the crowd, which is exactly what I need and exactly what might get us killed. I light the fuel line with a lighter that's been in my pocket since the warehouse days, more habit than plan. The alley mouth goes up in a wall of orange, and 2 hounds skid straight into it, shrieking a sound that isn't animal and isn't quite anything else either. 4 left. They're smarter than I hoped. Already circling around the fire instead of through it. Heavy things, I say out loud, mostly to myself, and pull a steel shelving unit out of the black door, 8 feet tall, meant for holding 2 tons of stacked inventory. I don't throw it. I can't throw it. I drop it, sideways, directly into the path of the circling hounds, and the crash alone staggers 2 of them long enough for Suli to put them down. The last 2 reach me before I can pull anything else out. 1 gets a shoulder against my ribs, and I go down hard onto broken asphalt, air gone from my lungs. And for 1 very clear second, I understand that a warehouse full of canned goods does nothing for the man about to have his throat opened by something with cracked ash skin and red light leaking out of the cracks. Then the hound on top of me simply isn't there anymore. It's in 3 pieces, and standing where it used to be is a man built like a shipping container, knuckles wrapped in something that isn't quite skin anymore. More like gray stone with veins of dull orange running through it. "Stay down if you're going to lie there," he says, not unkindly, and turns to meet the last hound with a punch that ends the fight in 1 motion. I get up slowly, ribs screaming, and the man looks at me with the flat assessment of someone used to counting casualties. "Han Tai," he says. "Special Forces, before all this. You the one who lit that fire line?" "Chen Mo." And yes, Good instinct. Bad execution. You should have sealed the alley before the pack noticed the entrance, not after. He says it without cruelty, the way a drill instructor corrects a recruit who's still alive to be corrected. You're not military. What are you? I don't have a good answer that doesn't sound insane, so I give him the true one. Inventory manager. Something in his face shifts. Not disbelief. Something closer to recalculation. That explains the shelving unit falling out of nowhere, he says. We'll talk about that later. Right now, the basement's screaming again. We're wrong about it being over. A second wave rises from a crater 2 streets down, larger, and at the center of it something climbs out that isn't hound-sized at all. A hunched shape the height of a delivery van. Ash-cracked skin pulsing with that same red light, but denser, older-looking, moving with the deliberate weight of something that knows it's the strongest thing on the street. Elite Core, Han Tai says, already moving toward it. First one of these I've seen since it started. It'll be smarter than the small ones. Suli's out of rifle rounds for anything that size. I'm out of shelving units heavy enough to matter. What I have left is 40 liters of the same fuel I used on the pack, and an idea that might get all 3 of us killed if the timing's off by even a second. Han Tai. Can you hold it in place for 5 seconds? Not kill it, just hold it. I can hold anything for 5 seconds. I don't explain the rest. There isn't time, and honestly I'm not sure the plan survives being said out loud. I pull the fuel canisters from the hull 2 at a time, stacking them in a rough semicircle around the spot where Han Tai plants himself directly in the elite hound's path, taking a blow to the shoulder that would have caved in a car door and not moving an inch. 4 seconds. I'm still stacking. Chenmo, 5. I light the last canister and throw myself backward as the whole ring goes up at once, a column of fire wrapping the elite core from every side, and Han Tai throws himself clear a half second before the heat becomes unsurvivable for anyone without ash for skin. It doesn't kill the thing, but it staggers it, blind and screaming, long enough for Han Tai to close the distance and drive a fist through the cracked plating on its chest, straight into whatever passes for a heart on something born out of a meteor crater. The elite core collapses into ash that doesn't scatter. It just stops being anything at all, and the red light in the cracks around us starts going out, crater by crater, the way the stars did an hour ago in reverse. We don't get a clean victory. Threading back through the wreckage toward the basement entrance, we find a woman, one of the 211, who didn't make it inside in time. She's not one of the loud ones Suli worried about. She's someone who went back for a child that wasn't hers, got the child through the door, and didn't get herself through in time behind them. Nobody says anything about it for a long moment. Han Tai is the one who finally moves her, carefully, away from the open street. And there's a particular kind of silence that settles over the 3 of us that has nothing to do with exhaustion. You did the numbers wrong, Suli says quietly to me. Not cruel, just honest. 211 people isn't a head count. It's 211 separate chances for something to go wrong in the 6 seconds between the door and the dark. I don't argue. I write the number down anyway, later, because that's what I do with things that hurt. I make them into something I can act on instead of something I just feel. 1 person. That's the price of the first wave, and it's the first entry in a column I already know isn't going to stay at 1. Something changes in the black door that night, and I only notice because I reach in afterward, exhausted, to pull out water for the survivors, and my hand goes further than it should before finding anything. The space feels larger. Not visibly, there's still nothing to see, but the reach, the capacity, something underneath the mechanics of it has shifted. A new sensation arrives with it, unbidden, like a menu item appearing in my head that wasn't there this morning. The hall can hold a person now. Not freely. The same rule Luo mentioned, a crystallization contract, consent required, and the person doesn't age, doesn't breathe, doesn't live while they're in there. They simply stop, the same way the moth stopped on night 1, until someone pulls them back out. I understand immediately what it's for, and I hate how useful it is. Somewhere in that basement, there are people with injuries past what Suli's field kit can handle tonight. People who might survive if a real doctor reaches them in 6 hours, and might not survive 6 hours of bleeding in a basement with no doctor. The hall could stop their clock entirely. Freeze the wound, freeze the pain, freeze the 6 hours into nothing, and hand them back the moment help exists. It could also, I realize immediately, be used on someone who never agrees to it. A person frozen isn't dead, but they're not living either. No birthdays, no choices, no years, just gone until somebody decides otherwise. I don't like how easily I can imagine misusing that. And I don't like that Luo built the ability into a rank he handed to a total stranger without a single warning about what it costs the person on the other end of the contract. I don't use it tonight. Suli's kit is enough for what's down there, barely, and I decide, out loud, so Han Tai hears it and can hold me to it later, that the freezing option is a last resort, not a convenience. Han-Tai studies me for a second after I explain what just changed. Most people who get power like yours go looking for a way to hit harder, he says. You're going looking for a way to not have to hit at all. Didn't seem like I had another option tonight. You didn't. That's the point. He nods once, like something's been decided. I've got nowhere else useful to be, and you clearly need someone standing in front of you while you figure out the rest of that thing. I'm in, warehouse boy. Word travels fast through 211 frightened people packed into one basement. By the time the sun comes up, 3 of them who watched the fire ring from a cracked basement window are already retelling it as if I'd summoned the flames myself out of nothing. The same nervous awe I remember from 4 years of being the invisible man who signs delivery manifests. Except now nobody's laughing at the inventory manager who worried about expiration dates while the sky was still normal. 27 days until whatever comes next. I don't know the name of the second wave yet. I know the shape of the first column of numbers, though. 1 death, 1 elite kill, 1 new ally, 1 capability I already don't fully trust myself with. And for the first time since the wheel stopped spinning, I understand that surviving this isn't going to be about being the strongest thing on the street. It's going to be about staying the one still doing the math when everyone else has stopped being able to. 26 days left, and the basement under Wofeng Superstore already smells like too many people and not enough plumbing. 210 survivors, 1 death heavier than yesterday, and a countdown that doesn't care that we're tired. This isn't a shelter, Suli says over a folding table covered in the notepad columns we started 6 days ago. It's a waiting room. 1 more wave and it collapses on itself. Not from the hounds, from the crowding. Han-Ti's leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, still favoring the shoulder that took an elite core's full weight last night. She's right. I've seen this pattern before, different disaster, same math. People don't die from monsters first. They die from each other, 3 weeks into no toilets and no order. I already know the number that matters here, because it's the only number I've ever been good at capacity per square meter, and this basement fails that test badly. We need somewhere bigger, defensible, and, this is the part that cost me a full night of arguing with myself, somewhere that isn't advertised to 200 people who might talk. Suli finds it, not me. She spent 8 months before the wheel ever spun mapping every piece of Cold War-era civil defense infrastructure within 30 kilometers, the kind of paranoid preparation that used to make her coworkers uncomfortable and now makes her the most valuable person at this table. There's a People's Air Defense complex under the old textile district, she says, tapping a spot on a paper map that hasn't been updated since before I was born. Built in the 70s, sealed off since the 90s, officially decommissioned. Nobody remembers it exists because nobody who remembers it is still working for the city. How do you know it's still intact? Because I already checked. 2 months ago. Before any of this. She says it flatly, like admitting to a habit rather than a decision. I told you, 8 months of bad feeling. Turns out the bad feeling was right about everything except the timeline. Getting 210 people and 4 years of hoarded inventory into a sealed underground complex without announcing it to the entire district takes 4 days. Most of it at night. Most of it with Han-Ti standing watch at choke points while I make trip after trip through the black door, moving building materials I never bought from construction sites nobody's guarding anymore. This is the part of the story nobody would put in a highlight reel. No monsters, no fire, just a man walking into a scaffolded abandoned office tower at 2 a.m. and reaching into empty air to make steel beams disappear one at a time, then walking them out inside a bunker 2 kilometers away like he's restocking a shelf. 400 meters of rebar, 19 tons of concrete mix. A generator pulled whole from a shuttered hospital wing because hospitals in this district stopped answering calls 3 days ago and nobody's coming to reclaim the equipment. Lao Zhao finds us on the 3rd night, not the other way around, which tells me something about him before he ever opens his mouth. He's crouched over the bunker's old ventilation housing with a headlamp and a socket wrench, humming to himself, when Han-Tai nearly puts him through a wall for trespassing on what he assumed was an empty ruin. Easy. I'm not one of them, the man says, hands up, not remotely as afraid as he should be given the size of the fist near his face. I'm the guy who's going to get your air circulation working before you all suffocate down here, is what I am, if somebody doesn't break my hands first. His name is Lao Zhao, 41, was a maintenance engineer for the textile district before the buildings above this bunker went quiet. He'd been squatting in the old ventilation access for 3 days already, alone, surviving on canned goods he'd looted before the streets got dangerous, when he heard us moving concrete through what should have been a sealed wall. You people are hauling construction supplies through solid concrete, he says, once the wrench is back in his belt and Han-Tai has decided not to break anything. I've been an engineer for 18 years. I know what that isn't supposed to be possible, and I know better than to ask a stranger with a magic warehouse too many questions on our first date. I like him immediately. He fixes things instead of demanding explanations for them, and within an hour he's already redrawn the bunker's original air handling schematic from memory, correcting 3 mistakes the original 1970s engineers made. Every group needs someone who keeps the lights on instead of someone who just fights, Han Ti says later, watching Lao Zhao argue with a rusted valve like it personally offended him. You've got the fighter, you've got the medic, now you've got the guy who makes sure none of that matters if the air goes bad. The bunker becomes a base in 6 days flat, which Su Li calls reckless and Lao Zhao calls barely adequate, honestly. Sleeping quarters carved into old storage bays. A working kitchen. A perimeter Han Tai personally walks twice a day, memorizing every choke point like it's already under siege. The economy starts almost by accident. A woman from the original 210, a seamstress before all this, offers to trade 3 days of mending and clothing repair for a share of clean water beyond the basic ration. I say yes without thinking about what it means, and by the next morning 4 other people have made similar offers. An electrician wants extra rations in exchange for wiring the bunker properly. A former school teacher offers to run lessons for the 11 children among us in exchange for a private sleeping space for her elderly mother. You just built a currency, Su Li says, watching a small crowd form around what's become an informal trading corner near the kitchen. You didn't decide to. It just happened because you're the only source of things people need that nobody else has. It's not a comfortable realization. I didn't set out to become the richest man in a bunker of 200 people. I set out to survive a countdown. But scarcity makes economies, whether you plan them or not, and within a week I'm making decisions I never trained for: who gets extra rations, whose skills are worth trading for, how much of the hall's contents to reveal, and how much to keep hidden. That last part is deliberate, and I make it a rule out loud in front of Han Tai and Su Li and Lao Zhao, because a rule spoken to witnesses is harder to quietly break later. Nobody outside this room learns how much the hall actually holds. They see what I choose to bring out. They don't see the door. Why? Lao Zhao asks, genuinely curious rather than challenging. Because a man with unlimited supplies is a target the second word gets out, Han Ti answers before I can. Every warlord, every desperate faction, every military unit still functioning is going to want to own that door, not trade for it. Power like his doesn't stay a secret by accident. It stays a secret because someone works to keep it that way. Su Li nods slowly. Power equals target. Simplest math in the new world. We get one quiet night before the next problem finds us, and I almost don't recognize it as quiet while it's happening because I've forgotten what quiet feels like. It's Su Li who makes it happen, not me. She pulls 2 chairs up to the bunker's old boiler room, the warmest spot down here, now that Lao Zhao's rerouted the heating, and produces, from her own duffel bag, a small bottle of rice liquor she's apparently been saving since before the wheel ever spun. 1 drink, she says, pouring 2 cups. Then back to the spreadsheets. You've been carrying alcohol through an apocalypse. I've been carrying alcohol through 8 months of preparing for an apocalypse I wasn't sure was coming. Difference is, I finally get to drink it instead of just owning it for morale. She hands me a cup. You did good today. 210 people have a roof that isn't going to collapse on them. That's not nothing, warehouse boy. I laugh, actually laugh for the first time since the streetlights went out, at the nickname Luo used first and that Han Tai has apparently decided is now permanent. I used to think my job was boring. Boring people don't end up moving 19 tons of concrete through a wall. Boring people don't survive what's coming, she says, and for a second the joke drops out of her voice entirely. You know what I liked about you that first night? You didn't panic. You did math instead. That's rarer than any power on that wheel. We don't say anything big or dramatic after that. We just sit, 2 cups of bad liquor between us, listening to Lao Zhao argue quietly, with a ventilation fan 2 rooms over and the muffled sound of children laughing somewhere in the sleeping quarters. An actual laugh. The kind that shouldn't exist 12 days after the sky opened up, and exists anyway, because that's what people do when you give them a roof and a rule and a little bit of order. It doesn't last. Nothing does this month. But it's real while it happens, and I write it down later, in the same notebook as the numbers, because some things are worth keeping even if they don't have a price attached. The quiet ends 2 days later, when one of the traders who does supply runs through the old textile district, comes back pale and moving too fast. There's a group, she says, catching her breath against the bunker's inner door. South side, maybe 6 blocks. They're not surviving, they're recruiting. Converting is the word people are using. Whole families walking around with the same red eyes, same flat voices, following someone they call Mother without blinking. Mother? Su Li repeats. Nobody's seen her directly and lived to describe her clearly. Just the eyes. Everyone who joins gets the eyes. The trader shudders. They call themselves the Crimson Iris. And they're recruiting a lot faster than anyone should be able to, this early. Han-Ti's face goes carefully neutral, which I'm already learning is what he does instead of showing alarm. Mind control, he says. Somebody rolled something worse than fists on that wheel of yours, Chen-Mo. 24 days since the wheel spun, 21 days roughly, until whatever the second wave turns out to be. And somewhere 6 blocks south, something with red eyes and a title like Mother is quietly building an army out of people who used to have names. I look at the notebook, at the columns of numbers that used to feel like enough of a plan. They don't feel like enough anymore. But they're still the only tool I have, so I pick up the pen and start a new column. 22 days left. The bunker has walls, air, and 210 people who trust me more than they should. What it doesn't have yet is a system. The difference between a shelter and something that can survive contact with the world outside it. Lao Chao puts it best, standing over a hand-drawn schematic that's grown to cover an entire section of wall in the old boiler room. Right now, we're a very well-stocked hole in the ground. A hole in the ground doesn't grow, it just gets emptier until it doesn't. He's not wrong, and the math backs him up the way math always does. 210 people eat through even a warehouse manager's stockpile faster than I expected. Not because I miscalculated volume, but because I miscalculated variety. Canned protein keeps people alive. It doesn't keep them healthy, and Su Li's already flagging early signs of vitamin deficiency in 3 of the younger children. We need production, not just storage, she says at the morning council. 4 chairs around a map table now, since Lao Zhao earned his seat the same way Han Tai did. By being right about things that mattered. A garden, livestock if we can manage it. Something that doesn't run out the way a warehouse does. And defense, Han Tai adds. We've been invisible so far because we're new and quiet. That ends the moment anyone outside this room learns what's actually down here. 2 priorities, 1 limited stretch of the bunker's usable space, and a hall that can move materials fast but can't manufacture time or square footage. This is the dilemma Su Li warned me was coming back on day 2, except now it has a face reinforce the outer perimeter this week, or clear and plant the old parking sublevel for food production. Not both. Not yet. I make the call and I make it out loud so everyone at the table can hold me to it later. Perimeter first. A garden that gets raided in week 3 is a garden that fed nobody. We build slow, but we build safe. Han Tai nods once, satisfied. Su Li doesn't argue, but I see her write something down that looks less like agreement and more like a note to revisit the decision if the timeline shifts. The perimeter work eats 4 days. Lao Zhao converts an old loading ramp into a choke point that funnels anyone approaching the bunker's main entrance into a single exposed corridor. Covered from 2 angles by positions Han Tai personally selected and tested by standing in them himself, imagining every angle an attacker could take. I move the raw materials. Scavenged rebar, salvaged steel plate from a shipping yard nobody's guarding, concrete mix from 3 different abandoned construction sites so no single missing shipment draws attention. It's not glamorous work. It's the same skill set that used to get me a mediocre year-end review at Wofeng, knowing exactly what's available, exactly where, and exactly how to move it without anyone noticing the gap it leaves behind. On the 4th night, the perimeter gets its first real test, and it isn't the Crimson Iris, and it isn't monsters. It's 4 men with kitchen knives and a crowbar, the kind of desperate opportunists that 22 days of collapse produces faster than anything supernatural. People who were accountants and delivery drivers 3 weeks ago, now hungry enough to try their luck against a bunker they've heard rumors about. Han Tai handles it before I even reach the entrance corridor, which tells me the choke point design works exactly as intended. 2 of the 4 run the second they see him step out of the shadow he'd been standing in. The other 2 don't get the chance to reconsider. He disarms them both in under 10 seconds, breaks nothing he doesn't have to, and has them sitting against the wall by the time Su Li arrives with a first aid kit for the one who scraped his hand trying to run. You're going to feed them, I say, half question, half already knowing the answer, watching Su Li hand water to the man who'd been holding the crowbar an hour ago. They're not monsters, Chen-Mo. They're hungry people who made a bad decision. There's a difference, and it matters which one we choose to remember when this is over. She doesn't look up from the bandage she's wrapping. We feed them. We send them off with enough to not have to try this again somewhere else. Word spreads either way. Might as well spread the version where we're not the villains of somebody else's survival story. It's the right call. And it's also, I realize watching it happen, the first real test the perimeter design passed, not because it kept everyone out, but because it let us choose how the encounter ended, instead of the encounter choosing for us. Face slap. Quiet version, the 2 who ran are going to tell people the bunker with rumors around it is guarded by someone who could have killed them and didn't bother. The council meets again 2 nights later with a name nobody at the table wants to say first. Lao Zhao says it anyway, because avoiding it doesn't make the reports stop coming in. Bloodblade. That's what people are calling the group moving through the eastern settlements. Not scavengers, not desperate people with kitchen knives, organized, armed, led by someone people describe as fighting with knives that aren't fully there. Shadow clone stuff, multiple blades from one man, moving faster than anyone should be able to track. Page in, Su Li says, and the way she says the name tells me she's already been asking around, already building a file the way she builds files on everything that might eventually try to kill us. Former private security contractor before the wheel spun. Got a reputation for being efficient and having no interest in who he had to hurt to stay that way. If he awakened into something that lets him fight like a dozen men from one body, that reputation just became a lot more dangerous. How close? I ask. 3 settlements cleared in the last 6 days, each one smaller than us, each one less prepared. At the rate they're moving, they reach our district inside 2 weeks. She sets down the report, hand-drawn maps, second-hand accounts from traders who've seen the aftermath. They're not recruiting like the Crimson Iris. They're not converting anyone. They're just taking everything and leaving nothing behind that could feed a rival. Han Ti's jaw tightens. In a way I'm learning means he's already running tactics in his head. 2 threats moving toward us from 2 directions. One that wants to own our mines. One that wants to own our supplies. Neither of them knows about the other, best guess, which means neither of them knows we're worth being afraid of yet. I look at the map, at the perimeter we just finished, at the food production we haven't started yet because I chose defense first. The choice is starting to look less like caution and more like the only thing standing between 210 people and becoming somebody else's resource column. We keep building, I say. Faster now. Garden goes in this week regardless of the risk. Su Li's right. We can't outstockpile 200 mouths forever. And Lao Zhao, I want a second choke point, a fallback, in case the first one ever actually gets tested by more than 4 hungry men with a crowbar. Nobody argues. The numbers on the table don't leave much room to. Late that night, after the council breaks and the bunker settles into the particular hush of 200 people trying to sleep in close quarters, I find Lao Zhao still awake in the boiler room. Not working, just sitting with a cup of something that isn't tea, staring at the schematic he's redrawn 4 times this week. You ever think about what we were 3 weeks ago? He asks, not looking up. I fixed air conditioners. You counted cans. Su Li patched up soldiers nobody remembers anymore. Han Tai broke things the government told him to break. He laughs, short and tired. Now we're a government. Sort of. A really small, really underground one. Does that bother you? No. He finally looks up. It's just funny. The end of the world, and it turns out the thing that saves people isn't the strongest fist or the biggest gun. It's somebody who knows how to keep the air moving and the food coming and the walls standing, same skills as before, just higher stakes. I don't have an answer for that, so I don't try to give one. I just sit with him a while, the way Su Li sat with me 2 nights ago, because I'm starting to understand that the quiet moments between the crises, are as much a part of surviving as the fire and the fists. 20 days left until whatever comes after fire rain. 2 threats converging from 2 directions, neither aware of the other. Neither aware yet of what's waiting for them in a bunker under the old textile district that used to just be a hole in the ground. It isn't a hole in the ground anymore. It's a system. And systems, unlike people, don't panic. They just process whatever comes at them, one decision at a time, until something either breaks or holds. I intend to make sure it holds. 19 days left. The garden goes in on schedule, 3 sub-levels down where the old parking structure used to hold delivery vans, and for the first time since the wheel spun, I plant something instead of just extracting it. Laoja rigs grow lights off the generator. Su Li tests soil samples I pulled whole from a farm supply store 2 districts over. And for about 6 hours, the bunker feels less like a bunker and more like the beginning of an actual place people could live in for years, not just survive in for weeks. The 6 hours end with a voice message. It comes through an old walkie-talkie one of the traders picked up on a supply run, tuned to a frequency nobody official uses anymore. The kind survivors have started repurposing to shout warnings and rumors across the ruined district. This one isn't a rumor. It's addressed to me, by name, Chen Mo. The voice is rough, familiar in a way that makes my stomach drop before my brain finishes placing it. It's Guan Li. You remember me? Doc 12, night shift, 4 years running the loading bay next to your inventory office. Words going around about a warehouse manager with an endless supply closet feeding half the old textile district. Didn't believe it until 3 people described the same guy pulling fuel canisters out of thin air during fire rain. A pause, and something in his tone shifts, harder. We're not doing so good out here, old friend. Figured you wouldn't mind sharing, seeing as how you've clearly got more than enough for yourself. Han Ti's expression doesn't change. but his hand finds the wall beside the radio, steadying himself the way a soldier does when a threat assessment just updated. Someone you know? Coworker? 4 years. I set the radio down carefully like it might go off again on its own. He was quiet, kept to himself. Never struck me as dangerous. That was before the wheel, Suli says. Everyone's capable of things now that they weren't 3 weeks ago. Question is what he rolled. We find out faster than I'd like. 2 nights later, a scouting patrol Han Tai sends toward the old textile district's northern edge comes back running, one man limping. Describing something that sounds less like a person and more like a force of nature, Guan Li tearing through a rival scavenger group's barricade with his bare hands, laughing while he did it. Skin cracking with strain but never quite breaking, taking hits that should have put him down and shrugging them off like insect bites. Berserker, Han Tai says, once the scout's finished. Raw physical power, probably scales with pain or anger, and from the sound of it, not much left upstairs keeping it in check. That's the dangerous kind. Not because they're strong, because they don't stop when strong should be enough. The recruiting patrol Guan Li sends toward our perimeter 3 days later isn't him personally, not yet. It's 6 of his people, armed with looted weapons, testing the choke point Lao Jiao built with the casual confidence of a group that hasn't lost a fight in weeks. Han Tai handles it the way he handled the 4 men with the crowbar, efficiently with minimum permanent damage, sending 2 of them back with bruises and a message the bunker isn't an easy target. And it isn't interested in sharing. It doesn't feel like a message that's going to land the way I want it to. The same week gives us something better, in the middle of a supply run gone sideways. I'm 3 streets from the bunker with Suli moving salvage from an abandoned pharmacy, when a group of 4 scavengers corners a girl, 13, maybe 14, alone. Backed against a delivery truck with nothing in her hands but a kitchen knife too big for her grip. She doesn't scream. She doesn't freeze either. She's watching all 4 of them at once, head moving in small, precise arcs, and half a second before the nearest one lunges. She's already stepped sideways out of his reach. Not fast, exactly. Just early, like she knew before he moved. She's got something, Suli murmurs, already raising her rifle. Watch her feet. She's not dodging what's happening. She's dodging what's about to. I don't have a plan beyond the same one that's worked twice already. Heavy, awkward, unexpected. I pull a stack of empty steel shelving from the hall and let it clatter down between the girl and the 2 scavengers closing from her left. Buying Suli the half second she needs to put the loudest one down without a kill shot, just enough to end the fight. The girl doesn't run once it's over. She looks at me with the same flat, assessing expression Suli had the first night we met, like she's already recalculating what kind of threat I am and deciding I'm not one. You're the warehouse man, she says. It's not a question. I heard about the fire during fire rain. And the shelving unit. People talk? You've got good instincts, I say. Better than good. You knew he was going to lunge before he did. I always know a half second early. Started after the wheel. She says it like it's an inconvenience rather than a gift, shifting the too big knife in her grip. Doesn't help me fight, just helps me not be there when the fighting starts. That's not nothing, Suli says, lowering the rifle. That's the kind of thing that keeps a scouting patrol alive. What's your name? Xiao Yan. A pause, and something younger slips through the careful flatness. I don't have anywhere left. My building came down during the second night. I've been finding places to not be seen since. I look at Suli. She looks back, and I already know what she's thinking, because I'm thinking it too. 210 people in a bunker 3 streets away, a garden just planted, and a system that only works if it keeps growing in the right direction. Not just supplies, but people worth trusting. We've got a spare bunk and more food than we know what to do with, I tell her. No pressure to earn it, but if you want to scout for us, tell us what your gut says before it happens instead of after. We take that seriously. She studies me for a long moment, the same careful weighing I'm getting used to from people who've survived this long on instinct alone. Then she nods once and falls into step half a pace behind us, close enough to matter, far enough to run if she needs to. That night, after Xiaoyan settled into the bunk beside the children's sleeping quarters and the perimeter watch has rotated for the 3rd time, Suli finds me on the old loading ramp Lao Jiao converted into a choke point, staring at nothing in particular. You're thinking about Guan Li, she says. It isn't a question either. 4 years I worked next to him. Never once thought he'd be the kind of threat we're planning defenses against. I lean against the cold concrete. Makes me wonder what people would have said about me 3 weeks ago if you'd asked them whether I'd end up running a bunker. They'd have said you were the guy who cared too much about expiration dates. She sits down beside me. No ceremony, no speech, just presence. That's the thing nobody tells you about the wheel. It doesn't create anything new in a person. It just hands them a bigger version of whatever was already there. You cared about not letting things go to waste. Now you're keeping 200 people alive because of it. Gwenli was already someone who solved problems with his hands before this. I'd bet money on it, even without knowing him. The wheel just gave him a bigger hand. I don't have anything clever to say back. We just sit there a while. The same way we did with Lao Zhao 2 nights ago, not solving anything, just existing next to each other in a moment that isn't on fire. He's not going to stop asking, I say eventually. The radio message wasn't really a request. No, Suli agrees. It wasn't. 18 days left until whatever the second wave brings, and somewhere in the ruins of the old textile district, a man I used to share a lunch break with is testing the edges of a bunker he thinks should belong to him too. I don't know yet how that ends. I know it's not going to end with a radio call. I add a line to the notebook before I sleep, under the columns of numbers that have grown into pages. One new scout, 13 years old, worth more than her size suggests. One old coworker, worth watching carefully. One certainty, the kind Suli's 8 months of preparation taught her to trust before anyone else did. This isn't over. It's just getting started. 16 days left and the assault comes at dawn, when the perimeter watch is thinnest and the garden 3 sub-levels down is finally starting to show the first green shoots worth defending. The choke point alarm, a wired tripline Lao Zhao rigged after the last scouting patrol, goes off with a sound like a dying kettle, and I'm awake and moving before I finish processing why. Han Tai's already at the entrance corridor by the time I get there, and through the narrow firing slot cut into the reinforced doorway, I see what 6 days of ignored radio messages has finally become. Guanli isn't leading a raiding party, he's leading a small army. 30, maybe 40 people, some armed, most just desperate. All of them following a man at the front who doesn't look like the quiet dock worker I remember from 4 years of shared lunch breaks. His arms have thickened, skin gone the color of wet stone in patches, veins running dull orange beneath the surface the way Han Tai's knuckles did during Fire Rain, except spread across his entire body now, like the powers stopped asking permission to show itself. Chen Mo. His voice carries through the corridor, amplified by something that isn't quite human anymore. I gave you a chance to share. You sent my people home with bruises instead. That's on you now, not me. 210 people, I call back, hating how thin my own voice sounds against his. That's who you're about to attack, not me, them. Then 210 people should have thought about that before their warehouse man decided he didn't need old friends. The first blow lands before I finish deciding what to say next. Guan Li doesn't test the choke point the way the scouting party did. He simply walks into it, takes the concentrated fire from Han Tai's prepared position without slowing, and drives both fists into the reinforced concrete barrier Lao Zhao spent 4 days building like it's drywall. It cracks, not shatters. Cracks, spiderwebbing outward from the impact point, and that alone tells me everything about the math we're now working with. The barrier was built to stop bullets and desperate men with crowbars. It was never built to stop something that can punch through bedrock. Fall back to the second choke point, Han Tai orders, voice flat and fast, the sound of someone who planned for exactly this contingency and hates that it's happening anyway. Chen Mo, get the civilians moving toward the deep storage level. Su Li, cover the retreat, I don't fall back. Not yet. I have 4 years of knowing exactly what's heavy, and heavy is the only language that might slow down something that shrugs off bullets. I pull a shipping container's worth of scrap steel from the hull, dumping it in a rough wall across the corridor behind the first barrier, buying seconds instead of minutes. Because seconds are what I have to spend right now. It isn't enough. Guanli punches through the primary barrier on the third hit, and the corridor floods with his people behind him. And this is the moment I understand, with total clarity, that this fight was never going to be won by anyone standing where I'm standing. Han Ti meets him head-on, and it's the first time I've seen him take a fight seriously instead of efficiently. No economy of motion, no minimum necessary force, just the desperate calculus of a man who knows exactly how badly this could go, and is spending everything to buy time anyway. It costs him. Guanli's third hit catches him square in the ribs, and I hear something crack that shouldn't crack, and Han Tai goes down hard against the corridor wall, not unconscious, but not getting up fast enough either. No. I don't finish the word before Guanli's already moving past him, toward me, toward the deeper bunker where 210 people are being herded toward the storage level by Su Li and Xiao Yan. And I understand in the space of one breath that Han Tai just took that hit, so I'd have 3 more seconds than I would have otherwise had. 3 seconds. I've made better decisions with less. I pull everything flammable I can grab from the hall in one motion: construction adhesive, industrial foam sealant, 40 liters of the same fuel that killed the ash hounds 2 weeks ago. And instead of throwing it, I dump it directly across the corridor floor between Guanli and everything behind me. A wide slick of foam and fuel that expands and hardens almost on contact with air, the way construction foam does when it's meant to seal gaps in concrete. not slow down a berserker mid-charge. It catches his feet first. He doesn't notice until the foam's already hardened around his ankles, and by the time he does, it's spread up past his knees. Thick enough that his enormous strength is fighting against something that doesn't tear, only stretches and rehardens faster than he can break it. "Clever trick," he snarls, straining against it, cracks spreading through the hardened foam but not breaking clean. "Doesn't matter. I'll be through this in a minute." "You don't have a minute," Su Li says from behind him, rifle already up, and puts 3 rounds into the exposed joints of the men flooding in behind him. Not kill shots, disabling shots. The precise economy of someone who's spent 14 years learning exactly where a body stops working without dying. The raiding party breaks. Not from Guanli's failure, from the sudden brutal realization that the woman with the rifle knows exactly where to shoot, and the corridor they're funneled into offers no cover from her angle. They scatter back through the broken barrier, leaving their leader half-trapped in hardening foam and screaming instructions nobody's staying to follow. Guanli tears free of the foam roughly 90 seconds later, exactly as long as I need to get Han Tai moved to where Su Li's already redirected medical supplies from the hall, exactly as long as I need to understand that the fight isn't over, it's just moved to me personally. He finds me in the storage level's outer chamber, the one place in the bunker with enough ceiling height for someone his size to fight without being boxed in. And there's nothing left in his voice that sounds like the man who used to complain about the night shift schedule. "Just you and me now, old friend. No fire tricks, no sniper, just what you actually are underneath the magic closet." He's not wrong that I have nothing left that matches him, blow for blow. What I have is 4 years of knowing exactly how a building's systems connect to each other, and one specific detail about the storage chamber that I clocked the first week we moved in and filed away without ever expecting to need it. The old ventilation shaft running along the ceiling still connects, unmodified, to a domestic gas line Laojiao capped but never removed, because removing it would have meant tearing out a wall we didn't have time to rebuild. I don't run. Running invites a chase I can't win. I let him close the distance, taking a glancing blow across the shoulder that spins me half off my feet and leaves my arm numb from wrist to collarbone, buying exactly the 2 seconds I need to reach into the hall with my other hand and pull the one thing I prepped during those 90 seconds of foam buying time, a remote ignition trigger salvaged from a demolition supply run 2 weeks ago. Wired earlier this morning, half panic, half instinct, to the capped gas line overhead. "You should have taken the deal," Guanli says, winding up for the blow that's meant to end this. "You should have checked the ceiling," I say back, and trigger the ignition with a delay timed against the only clock I trust anymore. My own count. The one thing that's never lied to me since the wheel spun. The gas ignites 4 seconds later, a controlled burst rather than an explosion, but concentrated directly above him in a corridor with nowhere for the heat and force to go but down. It isn't enough to kill something with skin like wet stone. It's enough to stagger him, blind him with smoke, and buy me the half second I need to close the distance myself, instead of waiting for him to close it on me. The last thing he expects from the warehouse manager who spent this entire fight running away. I don't hit him. I couldn't do damage that matters with my own fists. Instead, I drive a construction-grade adhesive canister directly against his exposed throat and empty it point blank. Foam expanding fast and hard in a space too small for him to fight it off before it hardens across his airway. He goes down clawing at his own throat, not dying. The foam's not that thick, not meant to kill, just to buy 30 seconds of panic. And 30 seconds later, Su Li's there with a blade at his throat, and Han Tai, ribs strapped and moving wrong but moving, standing in the doorway with an expression that says he'd have finished this differently if his body would let him. Su Li wants him dead. She says it plainly, blade still resting against foam-covered skin, no hesitation in her voice at all. He brought 30 armed people to kill children in their sleep. There's no version of mercy that makes sense here. There's a version where we're better than the thing that just tried to kill us, I say, and I hate how uncertain I sound saying it, because some part of me agrees with her completely. I don't argue her out of it with logic. I argue with the one tool I actually have, the hall, and the option it opened up the night of fire rain that I swore I'd only use as a last resort. I offer Guanli the crystallization contract. Not death, not freedom, just time stopped indefinitely until someone decides otherwise. He doesn't fight it. Whatever rage carried him through the last 20 minutes has burned itself out, and what's left in his eyes when I make the offer looks almost like relief. "Do it," he says, voice raw from the foam still crusted at his throat. I don't trust myself not to do this again. Su Li doesn't agree with the choice. She lowers the blade anyway because it's my hall, my rule, my consequence to live with, and I pull him into the black door the same way I pulled a rock in on the first night. Except this time it's a person, frozen mid-breath, gone from the world without dying in it. The cost of the morning doesn't stop with Guanli. 3 of the newer residents, people who joined in the last 2 weeks, people whose names I'm ashamed to admit I hadn't fully learned yet, didn't make it to the deep storage level in time. One of them was the farmer who'd volunteered to manage the new garden 3 sublevels down, the one who'd been so proud of the first green shoots 2 days ago. Nobody says much about it that afternoon. Lao Zhao repairs the primary barrier with hands that shake slightly more than usual. Xiaoyan sits alone near the sleeping quarters, staring at nothing. The flat, instinct-driven calm from 3 weeks of survival finally cracking under the weight of watching people she'd just started to know disappear in a single morning. I find the notebook that night and write the number down, the same way I wrote down the first one during fire rain. 3 names. 3 people the perimeter wasn't fast enough to save, because a perimeter built for scavengers with crowbars was never going to be enough against something the wheel decided to make monstrous. 15 days left until whatever comes after fire rain, and somewhere in the black door only I can see, an old coworker sits frozen mid-breath, a decision I'm not certain was right, waiting for a version of me that might someday know what to do with him. The bunker survived. That's the number that matters most, even if it doesn't feel like a victory tonight. 207 people, down from 210, still breathing, still under a roof that held. I don't know yet what it cost us to keep it that way. I'm starting to understand that I won't know the full price until much later, that some debts don't come due on any schedule I can plan around. 12 days since Guanli went still inside the hall, and the sky changes color again on a Tuesday morning nobody was ready for. Not red this time. Green, sickly, and low, crawling across the horizon like something spilled across the atmosphere instead of falling through it. Xiaoyan feels it before anyone else does. She goes rigid at breakfast, spoon halfway to her mouth, eyes unfocused for a full 3 seconds before she says, flatly, "Something's wrong." Not close yet, but wrong. Suli's already moving before the first alarm sounds. "Second wave," she says. Has to be. Fire rain was day 28. If the pattern holds, it holds. Reports crackle in over the salvaged radio, within the hour creatures rising not from craters this time, but from the ground itself, cracking up through pavement and foundation like the Earth's decided to stop cooperating with anything built on top of it. The beast uprising, people are already calling it. And unlike the ashhounds, these things don't hunt in packs that can be funneled and burned. They're bigger, individually dangerous, and they're not concentrated in one district. They're everywhere at once, which means every settlement in the region is fighting its own war today, with no reinforcements coming from anywhere. I don't get to focus on that problem alone because the second front arrives less than 2 hours later and it doesn't crawl up through the pavement. It walks in through the front choke point under a white flag, 12 armed soldiers in matching gear that hasn't been looted from anywhere. Actual military hardware, actual discipline in the way they hold formation. Their commander introduces himself while Han Ti keeps a hand near his own weapon and Lao Zhao quietly reroutes 2 civilians away from the entrance corridor. General Sima Wei, Eastern Military Zone. He's mid-50s, composed in a way that feels rehearsed, the kind of calm that comes from years of being the most powerful person in every room he enters. "I understand you're the one keeping this district fed." Impressive for a civilian operation. "We manage," I say, giving nothing away. The way Han Ti's been coaching me to answer strangers since the day I made the rule about the hall staying secret. Manage is underselling it, from what I've heard. Fuel out of nowhere during fire rain. A bunker fortified faster than my own engineers could manage it. Whatever you're sitting on, Mr. Chen, it's the kind of resource the Eastern Zone was built to organize properly. He doesn't quite smile. I'm here to offer consolidation. Your people, your supplies, your talents, folded into zone protection. In exchange, you get real security, armor, trained soldiers, not 4 civilians improvising with scrap steel. The offer sounds reasonable exactly the way a trap sounds reasonable right before it closes. Suli's expression doesn't change, but I catch the almost imperceptible shift in her weight, the readiness of someone calculating exits. "And if we decline?" I ask. Sima Wei's composure doesn't crack, but something underneath it sharpens. "Then you're an unaffiliated resource stockpile in a collapsing region, Mr. Chen, and I'd be doing my job badly if I didn't point out how quickly that status tends to change once other factions learn what you're sitting on. I'm not the only interested party. I'm just the one who bothered to ask politely. It's not a threat, exactly. It's worse. It's an accurate description of a world where politeness is the only thing standing between an offer and a confiscation, and both of us know it. I don't get to answer him because the ground 50 meters from the bunker entrance splits open with a sound like tearing fabric. And something the size of a delivery truck hauls itself up out of the crack, segmented and gray, Too many limbs moving in patterns that don't match any animal I've ever seen. Sima Wei's soldiers react with drilled precision, forming a firing line without waiting for an order. Han Ti's already moving the opposite direction, positioning himself between the creature and the bunker entrance. Because 12 well-trained soldiers and a warehouse manager's improvised defenses have exactly one thing in common right now. Neither side wants 207 civilians caught in whatever happens next. Coordinated fire, Section 3. Sima Wei snaps, and for a moment the negotiation simply stops existing, replaced by the older, simpler math of a shared threat. The creature shrugs off the first volley entirely, plating along its segmented back, deflecting rounds that would have dropped an ash hound in one hit. It's faster than its size suggests, closing the distance to the firing line in 3 strides, and I watch one of Sima Wei's soldiers get thrown clear across the choke point corridor before I've finished deciding whether I even want to help the man who just threatened to take everything I've built. I decide anyway because 207 people are still standing behind me, and the math doesn't care whose side anyone's technically on right now. Han Tai, the legs! I call, already pulling from the hall. Not fuel this time. Nothing flammable will matter against something with plating like that. I need friction, not fire. I dump 40 liters of construction lubricant across the ground directly in the creature's charging path, the same industrial-grade slick Lao Jiao uses for the ventilation seals. And the thing's front legs go out from under it mid-stride, sending it crashing sideways into the choke point's reinforced wall instead of through the firing line. Han Ti's already moving before it's fully down, driving both fists into the exposed joint where 2 segments meet, the one place the plating doesn't quite cover. It's not a killing blow. It's an opening, and Sima Wei's soldiers, recovering fast professionals despite the surprise, pour concentrated fire into the gap Han Tai just created. And this time the volley does what the first one couldn't. The creature collapses, twitching, dead within seconds once the coordinated fire finds the soft tissue underneath its plating. Silence afterward, broken only by the soldier who got thrown clear groaning as 2 of his squadmates help him upright, ribs bruised but intact. Sima Wei looks at the corpse, then at me, then at the slick of construction lubricant still glistening across the corridor floor, and something in his calculated composure shifts into genuine reassessment. Friction, not fire, he says slowly. You anticipated the plating would deflect flame the way it deflected our rounds. You solved a problem my engineers would have needed field data to even identify. He glances at Han Tai, still catching his breath by the corpse. And your man found the one seam in that plating without a second's hesitation. We've had practice, I say. Clearly. He's quiet a moment, recalculating something behind steady eyes. I withdraw the consolidation offer, Mr. Chen, not out of generosity, out of updated math. An asset that solves problems my own division couldn't solve in the field isn't an asset I want folded into a slower bureaucracy where good instincts get buried under 6 layers of approval before anyone acts on them. It's not trust. I understand that immediately, and I can see Su Li understanding it too, her posture staying carefully neutral rather than relieved. It's a predator deciding a different predator isn't worth the fight today, which is its own kind of dangerous, because today's math can change. What happens instead? I ask. Trade. Mutual notification when something like that. He nods at the creature's corpse, shows up near either of our territories. Nothing that requires trust, Mr. Chen. Just arrangements that keep both our people breathing a little longer. He extends a hand, and I shake it. Because refusing outright buys nothing, and this version of the relationship at least keeps 207 people out of a bureaucratic chain of command that clearly doesn't move fast enough to matter in a fight like the one we just survived. His soldiers don't look convinced. I catch more than one of them glancing at the lubricant slick, at Han Tai's exposed knuckles still bearing traces of creature plating, with something that isn't quite respect, but is at least no longer dismissal. Civilians improvising with scrap steel just solved a problem 12 trained soldiers with real hardware couldn't solve alone, and that's not a fact any of them are going to forget quickly. Whatever they call us behind our backs tonight, Sima Wei's convoy withdraws an hour later, promising contact through the same radio frequency Guan Li once used to threaten us, and I don't relax the entire time I watch them go. That's not over, Han Tai says. Once the last vehicle disappears around the ruined textile district's edge, men like him don't forget being surprised. He'll be back, either as an ally when it's convenient or a threat when it isn't. Today just decided which one comes first. We bought time, Su Li says. That's what today actually was. Not peace. Time. 11 days left until whatever comes after the beast uprising finishes cracking through the district's foundations. And somewhere out there, a culture calling itself the Crimson Iris is still growing. Still converting, still building towards something none of us have seen coming yet. 2 threats now confirmed, a third that might have just decided to be a reluctant neighbor instead of an enemy, and a bunker that held through both without losing anyone new today, which feels like the closest thing to good news the last 2 weeks have offered. I write the numbers down that night anyway, because that's still the only tool I trust completely. 207 people, unchanged since Guanli's assault. 1 dead creature, the first thing we've killed that wasn't born from a meteor crater. 1 uneasy arrangement with a general who'll break it the moment the math favors him doing so. Xiaoyan finds me at the notebook, still awake past when she should be, and sits across from me without asking permission, the way she started doing over the last 2 weeks. "The wrong feeling isn't gone," she says quietly. "It's just further away again, like it moved somewhere else instead of leaving." I don't ask her to be more specific. I don't think she has the words for it yet, and I'm learning that pushing her for precision she doesn't have yet only makes the instinct less reliable, not more. I just nod and write one more line under the day's numbers. Xiaoyan says it isn't over. I believe her more than I believe Sima Wei's handshake. Somewhere south, 6 blocks from where this all started, red eyes are still spreading, 1 convert at a time, toward a wave none of us are ready to name yet. 9 days left, and Xiaoyan's wrong feeling finally arrives with a name attached to it. It comes through a scout who reaches the bunker at a dead run, 3 ribs cracked from something that caught her on the way in, gasping out a single sentence before she collapses into Suli's arms, crimson iris. Full force. They're not converting anymore. They're marching. 200, maybe more. Heading this way. Xiaoyan goes very still at the words, the same stillness from breakfast 9 days ago, except this time her face doesn't clear after 3 seconds. It stays wrong, and when she finally speaks, her voice has none of the flat calm I've gotten used to. "It's not just an attack," she says. "I don't know how I know. It's bigger than that." Hanti's already moving, shouting positions, and Lao Zhao's diverting every civilian toward the deep storage level with the practiced speed of someone who's done this once already and never wants to be caught unprepared again. I pull everything from the hall that might matter: construction lubricant, fuel, scrap steel, the last of the industrial adhesive, and stage it at every choke point we have. Because whatever's coming, it's coming with numbers Guanli's 30 never had. The crimson iris reaches our perimeter 40 minutes later, and it isn't a raid, it's a tide. 200 converts move with the same flat, red-eyed calm, no fear, no hesitation, absorbing losses without breaking formation the way a normal crowd would. Hanti's choke point holds for the first 10 minutes through sheer positioning and Suli's precision fire, dropping the front ranks fast enough to slow the advance without stopping it. It isn't enough. It was never going to be enough. Not against a wave built to test whether we deserve to survive it. I lose track of exact time somewhere in the fighting. The numbers stop being useful the moment the front line becomes chaos instead of formation. Converts flooding through gaps Lao Zhao's barriers weren't built wide enough to seal. Han Tai's holding the main corridor almost single-handedly, taking hits he shouldn't be able to absorb, buying seconds that are turning into minutes through pure refusal to fall back. Suli's voice cuts through the noise from the secondary corridor, sharp with something I've never heard from her before. They're flanking through the old ventilation access, the one Lao Zhao never fully sealed. It's the same access shaft I used to end the fight with Guanli 2 weeks ago, and I understand with sick clarity that the thing that saved us once just became the gap that's going to kill us now, because it leads directly toward the sleeping quarters where the children are still being moved. Not yet clear, not yet safe. Xiaoyan's already running toward it before anyone gives an order. She doesn't have Han Ti's strength or Suli's aim. What she has is a half-second of knowing before anything happens, and she uses every fraction of it. Meeting the first 3 converts pouring through the shaft with nothing but a kitchen knife too big for her hands and instincts too good for someone her age to have earned this way. She buys the time the children need. All of them clear the corridor. All of them reach the deep storage level. Every single one. Because she doesn't step back once. Doesn't let the flat-eyed tide push past her into the space where 11 kids are still moving too slowly toward safety. I reach the shaft entrance 11 seconds too late to matter. She's on the ground when I get there. The last convert, already down from a shot Suli fired the second she cleared her own corridor, and Xiaoyan's breathing when I drop to my knees beside her. Breathing but wrong. The kind of wrong that 4 years of nothing has never prepared me to look at without my hands shaking. "They're clear," she says, voice barely there, and there's something almost satisfied under the pain, like she's checking a number off a list the same way I do. "All of them. I counted. Don't talk. I'm getting you into the hall. It'll stop this, it'll stop the... won't work in time." She says it plainly, the same flat assessment she's used since the night I met her, except now it's aimed at her own body instead of an approaching threat, and I hate that even now, dying. She's still more honest about the numbers than I want to be. "You taught me that." Things that are already too far gone don't get saved by stopping the clock. They just stay too far gone, forever, instead of ending. I don't have an answer for that. I don't have anything except her hand, which I take anyway, because it's the only thing left to do with mine. She doesn't say anything dramatic. She doesn't get a speech. She just stops, quietly between one breath and the next, the way the moth on night one stopped mid-flight, except this time nothing brings her back. I don't remember standing up. I remember the shaft entrance still open behind me, more converts pressing through it, red eyes fixed on the corridor that leads toward everyone I have left, and something in my chest that isn't grief yet. Grief comes later. Grief needs time I don't have. Something closer to a door slamming shut on every calculation I've made since the wheel first spun. I reach into the hall the way I have 100 times before, and something's different. Not the reach, the space beyond it, which has always felt vast and empty, suddenly feels close, pressed against my own skin like the boundary between me and it has thinned to almost nothing. The first convert through the shaft swings a length of rebar at my head, and I don't dodge it the way Xiao Yan would have. I do something I've never done before. Something that arrives less like a decision and more like a reflex built from 3 weeks of pulling things in and out of a space where time doesn't move. I reach not into the hall, but around myself. And for one fractured half-second, the air within arm's reach simply stops. The rebar freezes mid-swing, close enough that I can see individual flecks of rust suspended in the space around it, and the convert holding it stands locked mid-motion, eyes still red, still fixed on a target that isn't where it used to be a half-second ago, because I've already stepped clear of the frozen strike. It doesn't last. 2 seconds, maybe 3, before the stasis collapses and the rebar completes its swing through empty air where I used to be standing. But 2 seconds is enough. 2 seconds is a lifetime measured against everything I've learned to do with heavy objects and bad timing over the last 3 weeks. I pull a section of scrap steel from the hall and put it through the space where the convert's balance has to go once the stasis breaks, and he goes down without me ever having to touch him directly. The next one through the shaft gets the same half-second freeze, the same follow-up, and somewhere in the 4th or 5th repetition I understand what Luo's rules actually meant when he said, "The hall grows through use, through survival, through the accumulated weight of consequence rather than convenience." The hall was never just a warehouse. It was practice. Every single time I reached into it for something the wheel apparently always intended me to eventually be able to do to the space around my own body. Han Tai finds me at the shaft entrance maybe 4 minutes later, ribs still healing wrong from the earlier fighting, and the sight that greets him is 6 converts down, unconscious rather than dead. Because some numb part of my brain kept choosing steel over fire even mid-collapse. He doesn't ask what changed. He looks at Xiao Yan, still and quiet on the ground a few meters away, and something in his face closes the way it did during fire rain. Grief filed away for later, the same way I'm filing mine. Because the tide's still coming and grief doesn't stop a tide. Main corridor's holding, barely, he says. Su Li's out of easy shots. She's saving rounds for whatever's actually leading this thing. If there's a leader in that crowd, we haven't found her yet. We find her 20 minutes later, when the flood of converts finally thins enough to reveal what's been driving them from somewhere near the back. A woman, unhurried, moving through the chaos like it doesn't touch her, eyes not just red but glowing faintly, the way embers glow when you think they're dead and they're not. Muhan doesn't fight the way her converts do. She doesn't need to. She simply raises one hand, and I watch 3 of Han Tai's remaining fighters go still where they stand, eyes shifting from focused to flat to red in the space of 5 seconds, turning against their own line without a sound. "You're the warehouse," she says, voice carrying strangely over the noise. Calm in a way that's worse than Guanli's rage ever was. "I've heard interesting things. A door only you can see. A stillness you just learned to make around your own skin." Something that isn't quite a smile crosses her face. "I wonder what you'd look like, thinking the way my children think. No fear? No hesitation? Just clarity." I don't answer her. I reach into the hall instead, not for a weapon, not yet, and pull the same half-second stasis around myself the moment I feel something pressing at the edges of my own thoughts, cold and patient. Testing for a way in the same way it just found a way into 3 of Han Tai's fighters. It doesn't work on me. I don't know if that's the stasis itself protecting the space around my mind, or something about the hall's nature refusing to let anything foreign settle into a space built to hold things exactly as they are, unchanged, but whatever the reason, Muhan's patient probing hits something that doesn't give, and for the first time her calm flickers into something like genuine surprise. "Interesting," she says again. Softer this time. Not tonight then, but interesting. She withdraws before Suli can line up a shot worth taking, converts breaking off with her in a retreat that looks less like defeat and more like a woman deciding the math doesn't favor tonight. Exactly the calculation Sima Wei made a week ago, except colder and somehow more dangerous for how little it seems to cost her. The tide recedes fully within the hour, leaving the perimeter cratered, 3 barriers down, and a silence that feels heavier than any of the fighting that came before it. I find Xiaoyan again once the last convert's gone, and this time I let myself kneel there without the clock in my head demanding I move. Suli joins me a moment later, and Han Ti and Lao Zhao, who I didn't even know had left the deep storage level, and none of us say anything for a long time, because there isn't a number in any column that makes this one easier to write down. I carry her myself later, to the small space near the garden 3 sub-levels down, where the first green shoots she never got to see are finally starting to fill in properly. It feels like the only right place, though I couldn't explain the logic of that decision to anyone, and for once, I don't try to. 8 days left until whatever comes after the beast uprising and the tide that just tested us and found something it didn't expect. I don't feel like I won anything tonight. I feel like I finally understand, in the specific way that only costs this much, exactly what all of this has actually been for. The hall isn't a warehouse anymore. It hasn't been for a while. I just wasn't ready to admit what it was becoming until it cost me someone to see it clearly. 7 days left, and the bunker holds its first funeral since Fire Rain, except this one has a name attached to it that everyone already knew. We bury her near the garden, the way I decided the night the tide receded, in a small plot Lao Zhao clears without being asked, lining the edges with the same steel he's spent 3 weeks turning into barriers. 206 people gather in the deep storage level's largest open space, more room than the actual gravesite allows, so most of them stand in silence on the ramp above, watching rather than crowding close, the particular etiquette people develop when grief needs space to exist without an audience pressing in on it. Suli speaks first, brief, unsentimental in the way she is about everything, which somehow makes it land harder than a long speech would have. She knew the numbers before any of us did. She used that half second to save 11 kids instead of herself. I don't have anything wiser to add to that. It's already the whole point. Han Tai doesn't speak. He stands with his hand on the small marker Lao Zhao carved, just her name, nothing else, because we agreed nothing else was needed. For a long moment, the same closed expression from the night of the tide, grief filed and held rather than displayed. I do say something, though I don't plan it in advance, and it comes out rougher than I want it to. 3 weeks ago, I counted inventory for a living. She taught me that some things don't go on a ledger. I'm not going to pretend I've figured out what to do with that yet. I just wanted her to have heard it if there was ever a version of this where she could. Nobody claps. Nobody's supposed to. We just stand there a while, 206 people who've all lost something in the last month, adding one more name to a list none of us wanted to start keeping. That evening, after the crowds thinned and the deep storage levels returned to its ordinary rhythm of children being coaxed towards sleep and traders quietly closing out the day's exchanges, Suli finds me on the loading ramp again, the same spot from the night we drank her rice liquor 2 weeks ago. She doesn't bring a bottle this time. She just sits, close enough that our shoulders almost touch, and doesn't say anything for a long while. "You're doing the thing again," she says eventually, "where you go quiet and I know you're running numbers in your head instead of just sitting with it. I keep thinking about the 11 kids," I say. "If she hadn't been at that shaft." "She was at that shaft because you told her, weeks ago, that her instinct mattered. You gave her a place to use it instead of just hiding from it. That's not a mistake to sit with, Chenmo. That's the reason 11 kids are asleep down the hall right now instead of dead in a ventilation corridor." She says it firmly, the way she corrects bad math, because to her that's exactly what this is. Bad math. And she's not going to let me keep running it wrong just because grief makes wrong math feel more honest than right math. I don't have an argument for that. I just let the silence sit between us instead, and for once it isn't heavy in the way silence has been for the last 2 days. It's just quiet. The kind Lao Zhao talked about weeks ago, back when the bunker first started feeling like something worth keeping rather than just surviving in. Was 3 weeks ago, I say eventually. Since the wheel spun, feels like longer. It is longer, measured the way it matters, Suli says. You're not the same person who tested a rock in a gutter at midnight. None of us are who we were a month ago. She glances toward the garden, toward the small marker just visible from here. Some of us don't get the chance to become whoever comes next. That's the actual cost of all this. Not the numbers in your notebook. The people who don't get a next chapter. We sit with that a while longer. The closest thing to peace either of us has had access to in days, and it doesn't fix anything, but it holds something together that badly needed holding. The council meets the next morning with a question nobody wants to be the one to raise, so I raise it myself. Because avoiding it doesn't make it go away any more than avoiding Guanli's radio calls did 3 weeks ago. He's still in there, I say, and nobody needs me to clarify who. Frozen. Waiting on a decision none of us have made yet. Su Li's expression tightens. He brought 30 people to kill children in their sleep, Chen Mo. I don't see the question. The question is whether we need what he can do, Hantai says, quieter than I expect. Muhan's converts moved like an army. What's coming after this, and something's coming, the pattern's held twice already, isn't going to care that we're tired. We need every advantage we can field, and like it or not, that includes a man who can punch through concrete. Lao Zhao, who's stayed quiet through most of this, finally speaks. There's a difference between using someone and trusting them. We could use him without pretending the second one's true. It's not a clean answer, and I don't pretend it is. I make the call anyway, the way I've made every hard call since day one, out loud, in front of witnesses who can hold me to it. We wake him. Under guard, under conditions. He doesn't get free run of the bunker. He doesn't get near the children. And the first sign of the rage that led 30 people here ends the experiment permanently. But I think Xiaoyan would have wanted us to believe someone could actually change, not just get punished forever for who they were 3 weeks ago. Su Li doesn't agree with the decision. She says so plainly, and I don't argue with her right to say it. But she doesn't block it either, which is its own kind of trust. Not in Guanli, but in me, and in the fact that the decision's mine to make and mine to answer for if it goes wrong. Pulling him from the hall feels different from pulling out a rock or a fuel canister. There's a specific, unsettling sensation to it. Like reaching into water and finding it thicker than expected. Resistance where there shouldn't be any. And then Guanli's simply standing in front of me again, exactly as he was the moment I froze him, mid-breath completing itself. 3 weeks of time that never touched him at all. He looks around the storage chamber, disoriented for exactly as long as it takes him to remember what happened, and then his face does something I don't expect. It crumples, just slightly, before he catches himself and forces it back into something steadier. How long? He asks. 3 weeks. Wave came and went. We lost someone. I don't soften it. Someone 13 years old protecting kids from a threat you never got the chance to face because you were busy trying to kill us instead. He doesn't defend himself. He just nods slowly, absorbing it, and something in his posture settles into a kind of exhausted acceptance that's harder to watch than anger would have been. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't think I even want it, honestly. Feels like it'd be letting myself off a hook I earned. He looks at Hantai, at the guards positioned carefully around the chamber, at Su Li's hand resting near her rifle without quite raising it. Tell me what I have to do to be useful instead of just dangerous, and I'll do it. It's not redemption, not yet, not close. But it's a start. And starts are the only currency any of us have had since the wheel first spun. That afternoon, I take stock the way I haven't let myself in days, a full inventory, the actual accounting kind, of everything the bunker's become since I first pulled a rock through a black door at midnight on a frozen street. Was 62,000 yuan in savings, a studio apartment, a job counting expiration dates. Is 206 people fed, sheltered, and mostly safe, under a working garden and a defensible perimeter, backed by allies who trust me exactly as much as the evidence supports, and not a fraction more. Was a man who tested a magic door alone in an empty street, unsure if any of it was real? Is someone who's lost a co-worker to rage, a scout to a tide of red eyes, and understood in the worst possible way that the hall was never just about objects. I write it all down, the good and the cost of it together, because separating them feels dishonest in a way I'm no longer willing to be, even in a private notebook nobody else reads. Lao Chao finds me at the notebook that evening with news that ends the quiet before I've had a chance to actually rest in it. Sky's doing something again, he says, voice careful in a way that tells me he already knows this isn't good news. Not red, not green. Gold this time, and it's not localized. It's over the whole horizon, like something enormous is about to arrive instead of just fall. Su Li's already at the radio when I reach the boiler room, static crackling through half-panicked reports from every direction, the same word repeating across different voices, different districts, different levels of fear. Avatar. 6 days left, maybe fewer, before whatever comes to judge whether 206 people huddled in a converted air defense bunker deserve to keep existing at all. I close the notebook and start a new page because the old columns of numbers aren't built for what's coming next, and I'm going to need every tool I have left to build ones that are. 5 days shrink to 0 faster than any countdown before it, and the gold light finally breaks apart over the ruined textile district at dawn, resolving into something that shouldn't be looking at us and somehow is. It doesn't walk like the Beast Uprising's creatures did. It descends, slow and deliberate, easily 30 meters tall, even folded into something like a humanoid shape, skin like poured bronze catching light that isn't coming from the sun. Where it steps, the ground doesn't crack. It simply stops being ground, replaced by something smoother, colder, like the Avatar's arrival is quietly editing reality wherever its feet decide to land. Trial, it says, and the word arrives not as sound but as pressure behind every set of eyes in the bunker at once, a single syllable that means exactly what it says and nothing more. Judgeworth. Hanti's already at the entrance corridor, and this time Guanli's beside him, 3 days out of the hall and still finding his footing in a body that spent 3 weeks stopped mid-motion. That's not a fight we win by hitting it, Hantai says, flat and certain. That's a fight that decides whether we're worth letting live. He's right, and the confirmation arrives within minutes because the Avatar didn't come alone. Muhan's forces, smaller now, thinned from the tide 2 weeks ago, but still numbering in the dozens, converge on the bunker's perimeter from the south, tendrils of pale light extending from the Avatar itself toward the converts, threading through them like it's testing whether desperation and control together produce something worth measuring. 2 fronts, one impossible and one merely deadly, arriving at exactly the same moment. Perimeter positions, now. Huntai's voice carries over the alarm, and the bunker moves with the practiced speed of people who've done this 3 times too many already. Suli's on the ridge above the main choke point within 90 seconds, rifle already tracking the converts moving through the ruins below. Laojiao's diverting civilians toward the deep storage level, faster this time, having learned every second matters more than the last. Guanli doesn't wait for an order. He moves toward the converts directly, and for one sick half-second I brace for the rage that tore through this same corridor 3 weeks ago. But it doesn't come the way I fear. He fights with the same raw strength, the same skin-cracking power, but there's something deliberate in it now, controlled in a way I've never seen from him. Like a man spending everything he has on purpose instead of losing himself to it. Not for me this time, he grunts, driving a fist through a convert's guard and pulling the blow at the last possible instant, disabling rather than killing where he can manage it. For her, the kid who never got the chance to see if I'd change. It's the closest thing to redemption I've watched happen in real time, and I don't have space to process it properly, because Suli's voice cuts through the noise from the ridge. Chenmo, it's turning toward you, the Avatar. It's not interested in the fight, it's watching you specifically. She's right. Through the chaos of converts and disabling blows and Hantai holding the corridor almost single-handedly, the Avatar's attention has fixed on me with the same patient, testing quality Muhan's mental probe carried 2 weeks ago, except scaled up to something that makes my knees want to buckle just standing under its gaze. You, it says, and the pressure behind the word doubles. Hoarder, keeper of stillness, show what you protect. I don't get a choice in the confrontation that follows. The Avatar's hand, easily the size of a delivery truck, descends toward me, not with violence exactly, but with the same deliberate weight of something testing a structure's foundations by pressing on it directly. I reach into the stasis the same way I did at the ventilation shaft 2 weeks ago, and this time it holds a fraction longer, 3 seconds instead of 2. Because 3 weeks of practice and 1 funeral have taught the hall something about urgency it didn't know before. I roll clear of the descending hand, and the ground where I was standing simply stops being ground, smoothed into the same cold nothing the Avatar's footsteps leave everywhere else. The fight that follows isn't a fight I can win through force, and I know it within the first 10 seconds. The same clarity that carried me through the fuel line trick during Fire Rain and the gas ignition against Guanli. This isn't a stronger opponent I need to outlast. This is a scale problem, and scale problems have never once been solved by throwing more force at them. I use the stasis 3 more times in quick succession, each one buying just enough space to reposition, to think, to keep from being flattened by something that could end this in a single, unhurried motion if I ever stood still long enough to let it. Between the second and third use, I reach into the hall for anything that might matter against something this size, and my hand closes around something I'd genuinely forgotten I owned. A crate purchased 11 days ago from a group of scavengers desperate enough to sell an unmarked military case for a fraction of what it was worth, back before I had any reason to think it was anything but scrap electronics. I never opened it. There wasn't time, and it wasn't a priority against threats with faces and names. I open it now, mid-dodge, and find something that makes even less sense in the moment than the Avatar itself, a fragment of something ancient, metal that isn't quite metal, humming faintly in a way that resonates unpleasantly with the same part of me that first felt the hall's boundary thin during Xiaoyan's death. I don't understand what it is. I understand with total clarity that it's the only thing in my possession that makes the Avatar's attention shift from patient testing to something closer to genuine attention. Where, it says, and for the first time the pressure behind the word carries something like surprise, did a hoarder find a god's remains? I don't get to answer, because the ground behind the Avatar erupts in a chaos that has nothing to do with me at all. Mu Han's converts, thinned and disorganized under Guan Lie's controlled assault and Su Li's precision fire, finally break formation entirely. And Mu Han herself, exposed by the collapse of her own front line, finds herself surrounded not by us, but by the very converts she's spent weeks controlling. Something in the Avatar's presence, the pressure of judgment radiating off it, seems to be interfering with whatever hold she has over them. One by one, red eyes flicker back towards something closer to their original color, confusion replacing blank obedience. And confusion in people who've just spent weeks being forced to hurt others turns, almost instantly, into something far more dangerous than obedience ever was. No! Mu Han's composure finally cracks, the first genuine fear I've seen from her, as a dozen former converts turn on her at once. Years of stolen will collapsing into a single moment of furious clarity. You don't understand what I was building. She doesn't get to finish. The crowd she spent weeks assembling closes over her in a single chaotic surge, and whatever happens in the center of that crowd, I don't see clearly enough to describe it later. Only that when the converts finally scatter, disoriented and freed and uncertain what to do with themselves now that the voice in their heads has gone silent, Mu Han doesn't rise again. It's not the ending I expected for her, and it doesn't feel like a victory exactly. It feels like the specific, ugly justice of someone's own weapon turning in their hand at the worst possible moment. A fate she built for herself, one stolen mind at a time. Finally collecting on the debt all at once. The Avatar watches this happen without intervening. Its attention split between the ancient fragment still glowing faintly in my hand and the chaos of a cult collapsing under the weight of its own broken control. When it finally speaks again, the pressure behind the words has shifted into something I can't quite read. Trial continues, it says. Fragment noted. Judgment not yet rendered. It raises its hand again, and this time I understand, with the specific clarity that's carried me through every impossible fight since the wheel first spun, that the stasis alone isn't going to be enough to survive what comes next. I need something more than 3 seconds of stolen time. I need the Avatar to stop testing my ability to dodge and start reconsidering whether the fight is worth having at all. Hantai's voice reaches me across the chaos, ragged from 3 weeks of fights that shouldn't have been survivable. Chenmo, whatever you're planning, do it fast. We can't hold the perimeter and watch you fight a god at the same time. I look at the fragment in my hand, at the bunker behind me. At 206 people who trusted a warehouse manager's math enough to still be alive this deep into a month that's tried to kill them a dozen times over? And something clicks into place that has nothing to do with the ancient metal humming against my palm, and everything to do with 3 weeks of learning exactly what actually wins fights like this. Not the fragment, not the stasis. The thing I've had the entire time. The thing Luo mocked as just a storage closet on the first night. And the thing that's kept 206 people breathing through 4 separate near extinctions since. I close my hand around the fragment, put it back in the hall, and instead reach for something the Avatar clearly isn't expecting from a man it's spent the last several minutes testing as a threat. I reach for everything else. And for the first time since the wheel spun on a frozen street 28 days before all this started, I stopped treating the hall like a weapon. The Avatar's hand is still descending, slow and inevitable, and I have maybe 2 seconds before the stasis trick either saves me a 4th time or finally runs out the way everything eventually does. I don't spend those 2 seconds dodging. I spend them opening the hall completely, wider than I ever have, wider than the emergency of fire rain or the desperation of Guan Li's assault ever demanded, and I start pulling out everything that isn't a weapon at all. Blankets, water, cases of it, more than any one person could carry. Medical supplies. Su Li's been rationing carefully for weeks. Bread, actual bread, baked in the bunker's kitchen just yesterday by a woman who used to run a bakery 3 blocks from my old apartment. I don't throw any of it at the Avatar. I set it down, deliberately, in the open space between myself and the converts still scattered and disoriented from Mu Han's collapse, and I keep pulling more. What are you doing? Hantai's voice carries disbelief through the chaos, watching a man supposedly fighting for his life instead unloading a month's worth of careful hoarding onto open ground. I don't answer him directly. I answer the thing actually watching, the thing whose hand has stopped its descent, hovering now, reconsidering. You said trial. I call up at the Avatar, voice raw but steady. You said judge worth. So judge this. I gesture at the growing pile. Food, water, medicine, blankets, everything I spent 28 days and 4 years of warehouse instinct accumulating, and at the converts nearby, still confused. Still afraid, reaching hesitantly toward supplies nobody's told them they're allowed to want. You want to know if we're worth letting live? Watch what we do with what we've got, instead of watching how hard I can hit. The avatar's hand doesn't move for a long moment. 30 meters of bronze-skinned judgment held perfectly still above a pile of bread and water bottles, and I understand, with the specific clarity of someone who's spent a month learning to read a room even when the room is the size of a collapsing city, that I've just done the one thing none of my improvised weapons ever managed. I've confused it. Muhan's former converts don't wait for permission a second time. Whatever hold she had over them broke completely in her final moments, and whatever's left underneath that broken control turns out, mostly, to be ordinary people. Hungry, exhausted, deeply unsure what to do with freedom they didn't ask for. They move toward the supplies slowly at first, then faster, and within a minute the open ground between the bunker and the avatar's feet is full of former enemies sharing bread with each other in a silence that has nothing to do with fear anymore. Fear feeds it, Suli says, and I realize she's beside me now, having abandoned her ridge position the second the fighting actually stopped mattering more than what's happening on the ground. That's the pattern, isn't it? Every wave so far has fed on chaos, on people scrambling for survival against each other. You just took that away from it. I didn't plan this, I admit, watching a former convert, a man maybe Han T's age, red gone entirely from his eyes now, just tired and human, hand half a loaf of bread to a child who's wandered too close to the chaos to be steered away safely. I just remembered what actually wins fights. 3 weeks too late to save the person who taught me. The avatar's hand finally lowers, not toward me, but away entirely, folding back into the massive, deliberate stillness it arrived with. When it speaks again, the pressure behind the words has changed completely. Less testing, more something closer to recalculation. Stability, it says. Unexpected. Fear absent where fear was predicted. A long pause. 30 meters of ancient judgment processing something that clearly wasn't in whatever calculation brought it here. Trial. Concluded. The gold light begins receding the moment the word leaves it. The avatar's massive form thinning at the edges like smoke deciding to become air again. And I watched 206 people who spent the last hour bracing for annihilation slowly, cautiously, start to believe they might actually survive this one. District, the avatar says, voice fading with its form, passes. Judgment recorded, return, not required, not required. Not the vague, ominous, not yet every survival story trains you to expect. A clean statement, final in a way that leaves no room for a sequel hook, no horizon darkening with a bigger threat, no letter arriving from somewhere with news of worse things coming. It's gone within another minute, the gold light folding back into ordinary sky. And the silence that follows is the loudest thing I've experienced since the wheel first stopped a street clock on a night that feels impossibly distant now. The cost of the morning doesn't announce itself all at once. It arrives in pieces, the way it always has. Han Tai limping badly but alive, 3 ribs that were already healing wrong from Guan Li's assault now definitely broken again. Guan Li himself bleeding from a dozen shallow wounds, standing over a convert he chose not to kill even mid-battle. Something settled in his face that wasn't there 3 weeks ago. Su Li, unhurt but hollow-eyed, already moving through the scattered former converts with a medical kit, treating strangers with the same care she'd give any of us. Lao Zhou emerges from the deep storage level once the all-clear passes through, and the first thing he does is find me and grip my shoulder hard enough to hurt. No words, just the specific relief of someone confirming with his own hands that I'm actually still standing. We lost 4 people in the final push before the avatar's attention shifted. 2 civilians caught in the initial chaos of the 2-front assault, one of Han Tai's newer perimeter fighters, and a former Muhan convert who took a wound meant for someone else in the confused final minutes, dying free rather than controlled, which feels like it should matter more than it does when I write the number down that night. 23 names now, total, since the wheel first spun. I don't stop counting them. I understand now, in a way I didn't during Fire Rain, that the counting isn't about the number itself. It's about making sure nobody who paid this month's price becomes just a statistic in my own head. The way expiration dates used to be before any of this started mattering more than a warehouse manager's year-end review. Guan Li finds me that evening, near the small garden marker that hasn't had time to properly settle into the ground yet, and doesn't say anything for a long moment. Just stands there with the same exhausted, hollowed-out look everyone's wearing tonight. She'd have liked today, he says eventually. The ending, I mean. Not the losses, just the part where nobody had to be the strongest thing in the fight. Just had to be smart enough not to feed the thing what it wanted. You did well today, I say, and mean it. Watching the last traces of the man who tore through our barrier 3 weeks ago settle into something steadier, something closer to actually earned. Not because you fought hard, because you fought like it mattered who you were hurting. He doesn't have a response for that, and I don't need him to. We just stand there a while, the same way I've learned to stand with Su Li, with Lao Zhao, with everyone this month has forced me to lean on, because that's the only response any of us have left after a day like today. Word spreads fast through the district over the following days, the way it always does. Not through any announcement I make, just through the simple, undeniable fact that a bunker under the old textile district survived an Avatar's judgment without losing its supplies, without losing its people to fear, without becoming the kind of place other survivors need to fear approaching. Groups start arriving within the week. Not raiders, not desperate scavengers testing our defenses. Actual settlements, smaller and less prepared than ours, sending representatives to ask, carefully, hopefully, whether there's room to join something that's clearly figured out how to survive when nothing else in the district has. I don't have a clean answer for all of them yet, but I have a notebook full of numbers that used to just track my own survival and now track something bigger, and I have 3 people beside me, 4, counting Guanli now, who've each paid enough to have earned a say in what this becomes next. The countdown that used to define every day since the wheel spun has finally, quietly, stopped mattering the way it once did. There's no clock counting down to a 5th wave. There's just the work now, the same work there's always been underneath the fighting. Keeping people fed, keeping people safe, keeping the numbers honest even when they're heavier than anyone wants to carry. I look out over the district from the bunker's reinforced entrance that night, at fires burning in windows that were dark a month ago, at a settlement built from nothing but 4 years of warehouse instinct and 1 very expensive bet on a rock that disappeared in a gutter, and for the first time since the streetlights went out on a frozen street, I let myself believe we actually made it through. 4 months later, I'm standing in the same spot on the bunker's reinforced entrance where I watch the Avatar's gold light fade into ordinary sky. Except now the view doesn't require imagination to call it a settlement. The garden 3 sub-levels down feeds close to 400 people now, expanded twice since the day it first went in. Run by a rotating team, Lao Zhao trained himself once he realized keeping the air moving and keeping the crops growing required roughly the same patient stubbornness. The choke point that once cracked under Guanli's fists has been rebuilt 3 times stronger, reinforced with salvage from 2 collapsed military depots that Sima Wei's eastern zone traded us fair and square. Because it turns out an uneasy arrangement built on mutual respect ages better than one built on threats. I walk the perimeter most mornings now, less because it needs checking and more because the walk itself has become the only quiet 30 minutes I reliably get. 400 people generate a lot of decisions that need a warehouse manager's particular kind of stubborn math. And I've learned to protect small pockets of time the way I once protected canned goods. Carefully and without apology. Han Tai runs security for the whole settlement now, not just the bunker's original perimeter. His ribs healed wrong in 2 places, permanent reminders of Guanli's fists and the Avatar's siege both. But it hasn't slowed him down so much as it's taught him to fight smarter, the way he always told me to from the very first night on that rooftop. He's training a dedicated defense unit now, a dozen volunteers who found out the hard way over the last 4 months that surviving this world takes more than instinct. It takes the specific, patient discipline he's spent his whole life practicing. "You did good, warehouse boy," he tells me sometimes, still using the name that started as Suli's joke and became something closer to a title nobody ever formally gave me. Better than most trained commanders I served under, if I'm honest. You just never noticed you were commanding anything because you were too busy counting cans. Suli stayed. I don't think I ever properly asked her to. It was less a decision and more a fact that revealed itself gradually, the way most true things in this settlement have. She runs the medical bay now, 3 trained assistants under her, a real clinic instead of a duffel bag, and improvised bandages. She still keeps a bottle of something worth sharing occasionally for the nights that need it, and we still sit on the same loading ramp more evenings than either of us would admit to anyone else. Lao Zhao married the seamstress from the original 210, the same woman whose offer of mending and repairs became, 4 months ago, the accidental first thread of the settlement's whole trading economy. Their wedding was small, held in the deep storage level, and it was the first genuinely joyful thing this bunker had hosted since before Xiaoyan's death, which felt, to everyone there, like a kind of permission to let ourselves be happy again. Guanli earned his place back slowly, the way real trust always rebuilds, not through one dramatic act of redemption, but through 4 months of small, consistent choices that added up to something nobody could dismiss anymore. He leads perimeter patrols now, the ones that go furthest out, the ones that carry the most risk. And I understand, without either of us ever saying it directly, that he's chosen that particular duty on purpose, spending his strength on protecting the same kind of people he once threatened to make a point about what kind of man he's decided to become instead. He asked me once, a month or so back, whether I regretted freezing him instead of letting Suli end it that morning in the storage chamber. No, I told him honestly. Xiao Yan believed people could be more than the worst thing they'd done. I didn't understand that as well as she did back then. I do now. He didn't say anything to that. He just nodded and went back to checking his gear for the next patrol, and that was enough for both of us. We visit the small garden marker often. Not just me, all of us, individually and together. The way a settlement remembers the person who made its survival possible without ever getting to see what it became. The children who grew up in the 4 months since, and there are new children now, 3 born in the settlement's own clinic, the first real proof that this place isn't just surviving, but actually building towards something with a future in it. Know her name before they know most of the settlement's history. Xiaoyan's watch. People started calling the section of perimeter nearest the old ventilation shaft, and the name stuck without anyone deciding it officially. I keep the notebook still. It's thicker now, more pages than the original ever had room for, columns of numbers that track 400 lives instead of 211, food stores instead of expiration dates. But underneath all of it, the same discipline that got me through the first frozen street: write down what's true, even when it's heavier than you want to carry. Because the truth written down is easier to act on than the truth left vague in your head. Luo finds me on an ordinary evening, 4 months and change since the wheel first spun, appearing on the perimeter walk without ceremony, the same bored harlequin coat, the same wheel strapped to his back like it's never once occurred to him to leave it behind. "Warehouse boy," he says, and there's something almost warm underneath the usual mockery, which is new. You made it through the whole cycle. 4 waves, 4 trials, and you're standing here instead of frozen in a gutter somewhere. Didn't actually expect that, if I'm honest. I've watched a lot of seeds since this started. Most of them didn't get past wave 2. You knew, I say, not quite an accusation, just a fact I've suspected for months and never had the chance to confirm. You gave me this power specifically, not randomly. He doesn't deny it, which is answer enough. I saw a logistics manager who cared more about expiration dates than most people care about their own lives. Figured that kind of stubborn attention might be worth more than another set of fists this cycle. He shrugs, the gesture of someone who spent a bet and is pleasantly surprised it paid off. Not every architect agrees with me on that. Some of them just want the spectacle, the reset for its own sake, watching what chaos produces. I've always found stability more interesting to watch personally. Guess I was right this time. Is it over? I ask. And I mean all of it. The waves, the countdown, the specific dread that's lived in my chest since a street clock froze at 11474 4 months ago. Or is there something else coming that you're not telling me about? Luo's quiet for a moment, and when he answers, there's none of the usual theatrical board delivery. Just a plain statement, the kind that's rarer from him than gold from the sky. This cycle's closed. Your district passed its judgment, all 4 waves accounted for. Whatever comes next, new cycles, new seeds elsewhere in the world, other architects running other resets, none of that's your problem anymore. You did the thing you were handed a wheel to do. You kept people alive. You kept a piece of civilization stitched together instead of scattered. He looks out over the settlement, the lit windows, the garden, the perimeter Hantai's patrol is currently walking without incident. That's a rarer outcome than you'd think, warehouse boy. Most seeds who make it this far end up ruling something. You ended up building something instead. There's a difference, and I don't think you've fully noticed it yet. He doesn't wait for a response. He's already fading, the wheel spinning once, idly, on his back, and his last words drift back over his shoulder almost like an afterthought. Enjoy the quiet, you earned it more than most. I stand on the perimeter a long while after he's gone, watching 400 people's worth of ordinary evening happen below me. Someone practicing a song badly on an instrument salvaged from somewhere, children arguing over a board game near the garden entrance, Hanti's patrol completing its final loop of the night without a single alarm sounding. Was a lake, a puddle 2 meters wide, evaporating in a desert somewhere far from here? The metaphor I never actually got to use, because Chen Mo never was a puddle, was always just a man who counted things carefully and once got handed a door only he could see. Was 62,000 yuan, a studio apartment, a job nobody remembered by name? Is 400 people fed, sheltered, and building toward tomorrow instead of just surviving today? A settlement with a garden that took root and a perimeter that held and a name, Xiaoyan's watch, that will outlast every one of us who actually remembers why it matters. I close the notebook, for tonight at least, and head back down toward the warm light of the deep storage level, toward Suli probably still awake in the clinic, toward Hanti's report on tonight's uneventful patrol, toward Lao Zhao's newest argument with a piece of machinery that's finally, after 4 months, started listening to him. The countdown that used to define every hour of every day is gone now, and in its place is just this. Ordinary evenings, hard-won and fiercely protected, The specific quiet that 400 people managed to build together out of a frozen street, a bad bet on a bank loan, and one very stubborn man's refusal to stop counting what mattered. It isn't the end of a war. It's the beginning of everything the war was actually for. I go inside, and for the first time since the wheel first spun, I don't bring the notebook with me.